Brahmachari Jaya Radha Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodananda Brajajanaranda Yashodananda Brajajanaranda Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira
Śhrīmad, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajacharya Astacharya Śhrīmad, His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki. Premsa Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktabinda ki. Shri Radha Krishna, Gopa Gopinath, Shamakunda Radhakunda, Giri Govardhan ki. Vrindavan Dham ki. Navadvip Mayapur Dham ki. Jagannath Puri Dham ki. Gangamaya ki. Yamunamaya ki. Tulasi Devi ki. Bhakti Devi ki. Samaveda Bhaktabinda ki. Gaura Premanandi. All glorious the assembled devotees. All glorious the assembled devotees. All glorious the assembled devotees. All glorious to Shishi Guru and Gauranga. So, thank you. So, we're reading from the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, entitled The Cosmic Creation, and chapter number 3, Pure Devotional Service, A Change in Heart. Text number 9. Rajakamaha Manun Devan Niritim Tu Abhicharan Yajet Kama Kamaha Yajet Somam Akamaha Purusham Param Raja Kamo Manun Devan Niritim Tvabicharan Niritim Tvabicharan Yajet Kama Kamo Yajet Somam Akama Purusham Param Rajakamo Manundevan
Rajakamo Manundevan
Niritim Trabhicharanyajat
Niritim Trabhicharanyajat
Kama Kamo Yajat Somam
Kama Kamo Yajat Somam
Akama Purusham Param
Akama Purusham Param
Rajakamo Manundevan Niritim Trabhicharanyajat Kamo Kamo Yajat Somam Akama Purusham Param. Please chant.
Rajakamo Manundevan
Rajakamo Manundevan
Niritim Tvabhicharanyajat
Niritim Prabhicharanyajat
Kama Kamo Yajat Somam
Kama Kamo Yajat Somam
Akama Purusham Param
Akama Purusham Param Rajakama Manundevan Niritim Prabhicharanyajat Kama Kamo Yajat Somam Kama Purusham Param. Anybody else want to chant? Rajakamo Manundevan Niritim Prabhicharanyajat Kama Kamo Yajat Somam Kama Purusham Param. Rajakamaha. Anyone desiring an empire or kingdom.
Anyone desiring an empire or kingdom.
Manun. The Manus. Semi-incarnations of God.
Semi-incarnations of God.
Devan. Demigods.
Demigods.
Niritim. Demons. Tu. But. Abhicharan. Desiring victory over the enemy. Yajet. Should worship. Kama Kamaha. One who desires sense gratification. Yajet. Should worship. Somam. The demigod named Chandra. Akamaha. One who has no material desires to be fulfilled. Purusham. The Supreme Personality of Godhead. Param. The Supreme. Translation. One who desires domination over a kingdom or an empire should worship the Manus. One who desires victory over an enemy should worship the demons. And one who desires sense gratification should worship the moon. But one who desires nothing of material enjoyment should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Please repeat. For one who desires domination over a kingdom or an empire should worship the Manus. One who desires victory over an enemy should worship the demons. One who desires sense gratification should worship the moon. But one who desires nothing of material enjoyment should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. So I'll read a little bit and talk a little bit, and read a little bit and talk a bit, which is what I do when I don't have time to study because I never check my WhatsApp messages. Checking 3 phones for messages and 2 Facebooks for messages and 2 emails for messages. I've not yet surrendered to checking what's up for message. For a liberated person, all the enjoyments listed above are considered to be absolutely useless. That's a powerful way to start up the purport. Only those who are conditioned by the material modes of external energy are captivated by different types of material enjoyment. In other words, the transcendentalist has no material desires to be fulfilled, whereas the materialist has all types of desires to be fulfilled. So I guess that we could talk about that. So, one of the themes in Vedic knowledge is there's a class of liberated persons and a class of conditioned persons. Actually, there's a mention in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, the Purushottam Yoga chapter, which some people are chanting for the month of Purushottam. In 15:16, let's see, Dvoimo Purusho Loke Sharjuk Shardevicha Shard Sarvani Bhutani Kutastuk Shard Uchate, which says there's two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In this world, everyone is fallible, but in the spiritual world, everyone is infallible. So the liberated persons consider all these enjoyments to be absolutely useless. That's a very powerful phrase. Absolutely useless. Not even a trace of use. Because the idea is that as long as we are desiring material things, we have to get another material body. And if we get another material body, we'll have to suffer birth, death, disease, and old age. This is mentioned in the by Krishna. He lists like 5 different verses called the items of knowledge. 13:8 to 12, and in 13:9 he says, let's see, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshana Darshana. One of the items of knowledge is to perceive the evil of birth, death, disease, and old age. So for the soul who is immortal and full of knowledge and transcendental bliss, this birth, death, disease, and old age is considered just an unwanted disturbance. It's something that one would like to live without if one had a choice, because it actually has nothing to do with the soul at all. We're imposed, these miseries are imposed upon us because we've accepted a material body, and we've accepted a material body because of our desires for sense gratification, which reminds us of another ecstatic verse from the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam. I think it's 5:5-4. Nunam pramata kurute vikarma yat indraya pritaya apranoti nasadu manyayata atmanoyam asanapi kleshada ashadeha. So Lord Vrishabhadev is advising his 100 sons that he doesn't think it good that people endeavor for sense gratification. Indriya pritya, the objects of the senses. Because if one does, one will acquire another material body which is full of miseries. Therefore he says, I don't think that's a good idea. So the liberated souls, they understand that desiring any material enjoyment is going to give them another material body. Therefore they don't want to desire anything material. So that's so what do liberated persons do? And if they're not doing anything material or desiring anything material, well, the impersonalists are sort of in a jam because practically all they can do is study Vedanta, which is hard to do 24/7 because they consider everything else to be material. But the devotees are in a more comfortable position because they have a variety of engagements which, because they're in relationship to the personality of Godhead, are considered spiritual and give one the spiritual result of ultimately attaining the spiritual world. So the personalist devotees of the Lord have varieties of transcendental engagements that they can desire, like to desire to be the eternal servant of, like Hanuman's desire to eternally serve Lord Ram is a spiritual desire, and Arjuna's desire to be the eternal friend of Krishna is a spiritual desire, and Radharani's desire to be the eternal lover of Krishna and serve him in that way. These are all spiritual things which can be desired and are transcendental to the material modes of nature. So continuing, the Lord has proclaimed that the materialists who desire material enjoyment and thus seek the favor of different demigods, as above mentioned, are not in control of their senses, and so give themselves to nonsense. One should therefore not desire any sort of material enjoyment, being sensible enough to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The leaders of such nonsensical persons are still more nonsensical because they preach openly and foolishly that one can worship any form of demigod and get the same result. This sort of preaching is not only against the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita or those of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, but is also foolish, just as it is foolish to claim that with the purchase of any travel ticket, one may reach the same destination. No one can reach Bombay from Delhi by purchasing a ticket for Baroda. It is clearly defined here that persons impregnated with different desires have different modes of worship. But one who has no desire for material enjoyment should worship the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. So that's a very common theme in Srila Prabhupada's preaching, because especially in India, has to contend with these people who are worshipping a variety of different demigods. In one sense, it was a relief for him to come to America because he didn't have to worry about people who were attached to all these demigods. He just had to give them faith that Krishna was God, and that was sufficient. He didn't have to worry about their long-cherished worship of Lord Shiva since their childhood. I met somebody on Harinam since I've been here in New York. He was sitting with his girlfriend, and he looked a little Indian, and he said he was Hindu. So I asked him who he worshipped. And he said he worshipped Lord Shiva, and then he said, but I also worship Krishna. So at any rate, so of course Krishna makes it very clear, and it's 9:25. Yanti Deva Vrtan Devan Patrinyanti Pachivrata Yanti Bhuteja Yajimam Vad Bhakta Yajinopimam. I lose track of them. There's two that end sort of the same. So yeah, if you worship the demigods, you go to the demigods. If you worship the forefathers, you go to the forefathers. If you worship the ghosts and spirits, you take birth among such beings. And Krishna says, if you worship me, you come to me. So it's very clear and it's very sensible. And therefore, Prabhupada uses the word foolish in this purport. He uses the word foolish, nonsensical, and foolish several times, actually, because just to stress the foolish and nonsensicalness of it. So we have to, although it may not be popular with all our Hindu friends and acquaintances, we also have to promote the worship of Krishna over the worship of the demigods, and remind people that there's a different destination depending on who you worship. And it's very easy to substantiate according to Bhagavad Gita, because we just chant that verse 9:25. So, continuing. Everyone should worship the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, and this worshipping process is called devotional service. Pure devotional service means service to the Lord without any tinge of material desires, including the desires for fruitive activity and empiric speculation. So, Prabhupada may be thinking of that verse, Anyabhilashita shunyam jnanam karmadhyam avritam anukulyena Krishna nushilam bhakti udama, from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where Rupa Goswami defines devotional service as being favorable to Krishna and being devoid of karma, jnana, and adi, which some people say means yoga, and which generally means etc. So, generally, for fulfillment of material desires, one may worship the Supreme Lord, as will be explained in the next verse, which is a very famous verse. Kama sarvabhav moksha kama vidardi tavena bhakti yogena yajeda purusham param. Generally, the Lord does not fulfill anyone's desires for sense enjoyment, but He awards benedictions to worshippers of the Lord. Let's see. Generally, the Lord does not fulfill anyone's material desires for sense enjoyment, but He awards such benedictions to worshippers of the Lord. That's interesting. So if you specifically worship Him for sense gratification, He might give it to you. For they ultimately come to the point of not desiring material enjoyment. It's also said elsewhere that He doesn't fulfill desires of the devotees for things that will be obstructions in their path of devotional service out of compassion. Prabhupada makes that point from time to time. The conclusion is that one must minimize the desire for material enjoyment, and for this one should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is described here as Param, or beyond anything material. Śrīpad Shankaracharya has also stated, Narayana Paro Vyaktat. The Supreme Lord is beyond the material encirclement. So, generally it's promoted that the best thing is not to worship the Lord for anything material, but if you're attached to material things, it's better to worship the Lord than to worship the demigod, because you'll become purified by worshiping the Lord and ultimately become free from your material desires. I mean, Krishna, because He's a nice guy, He won't give you something that'll definitely mess up your spiritual life. It's interesting. It's described that like Krishna fulfills the desires of His devotees in such a way that that one doesn't desire the same thing. I remember when I was growing up, I always wanted to have a girlfriend, a girl that I liked, and a girl who liked me, and it just never happened, And then I became a devotee and I became a brahmachari, but apparently this desire was still lurking around, So of course, you can't have girlfriends in Krishna consciousness. Only Krishna and Balaram can have girlfriends in Krishna consciousness. But you can have a fiancé who breaks up with you. So that was Krishna's program for eliminating that desire from my life. So Krishna, and there's that famous verse that Prabhupada likes to quote about how Krishna made his business fail, and that the Supreme Lord takes away the opposite. Not only does He not give you things that that might get in the way, but He takes away material things you already have because He feels that they would be in their way. And you can see if Prabhupada was a successful businessman, he might not, have taken sannyas and come to America and done incredible work for for the upliftment of humanity by giving them the greatest spiritual knowledge that exists on the planet to billions of people. So, yeah, that. Therefore, the devotees, they all see how whatever happens to them is, whether it appears to be good or bad, it's actually Krishna's mercy, because Krishna is behind managing our happiness and distress. There's a story they tell about, I don't think I told it here, so I don't like to tell the same stories in the same place. It's the story about the king who went hunting and he had an accident and he lost the end of his finger, and he was really upset about it. And he was telling his minister, explaining to his minister what happened, and his minister said that it was Krishna's mercy. And that wasn't what the king wanted to hear. In fact, he was so angry with the minister, he threw the minister in jail. So later he was on another hunting expedition, and he was captured by some dacoits who decided that he would be a fit offering for goddess Durga. So they bathed him and they got him all ready to sacrifice, and at the last minute they noticed he was missing the end of his finger. So he wasn't good enough to be offered to goddess Durga. So they let him go, So he was very happy about that. And so he went to the jail and found his minister, and he apologized and said, now I can understand that it was Krishna's mercy, because if I had my finger, I would have got, sacrificed by these dacoits. But the thing is, I can't understand is you're such a nice minister giving me this perfect advice, but I threw you in jail. So how is that? And so the minister said, well, if I wasn't in jail, I would have been accompanying you on your hunting excursion, and when they found that you weren't fit for sacrifice to goddess Durga, they would have sacrificed me. So the Supreme Lord, he can arrange it so that everyone benefits, even from things that don't look like they're at present beneficial. They can turn out to be a benefit. But we generally promote worshiping the Lord without any material desires. And there's this nice verse from the first canto, second chapter. Savai pum samparo dharmo yato bhaktir hoksajay haitakiya pratiyata yatma suprasidati. The supreme dharma for all of humanity is that by which one can render loving service unto the transcendent Lord. Such service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted in order to completely satisfy the self. So that's a very important, that's one of my favorite verses in the Bhagavatam. One, because it's a very general definition of what religion is. And people who are monotheists in other traditions could actually relate to that verse as, being sort of a summary of what religion is all about. So it's very universal. And it also talks about how that if we get to the point that our services has no material motivation and no interruption, our soul will be completely satisfied. So it actually gives the recipe for complete satisfaction. And everybody's actually looking for satisfaction. But generally, when people are dissatisfied, they never conclude that they're dissatisfied because there's some material motivation in their service to the Supreme Lord, or that there's some interruption to their service. They never think, oh, the problem is I have this material motivation, or the problem is there's some break in my service. But that's actually the problem. So when we encounter dissatisfaction, we can look within and see whether our devotional service is motivated or whether it's interrupted. And we can have like motivations that we're not really aware of. Like we might be motivated by something and not be aware of it until we don't get it, And then we realize, actually, I was really attached to that thing because it's not here, and I'm experiencing some anger or frustration or whatever. There can be all kinds of, like, from our conditioning for millions of births in the material world, there can be all kinds of subtle, things that material things or material conceptions that are very deep-rooted and that are actually impediments to our uninterrupted, unmotivated devotional service. So we have to be aware of that these things have to be eliminated and that they're problems. And of course, devotional service is a purifying practice. So by practicing devotional service, even though we have material contamination, by the purifying power of the devotional service, it'll be gradually eliminated. And of course, the great example in that is the story of Dhruva Maharaj. He had a really big material desire. Wanted to have a kingdom greater than his grandfather, who was Lord Brahma, or his great-grandfather was Lord Brahma. So, that's like serious. And so Krishna gave him a Vaikuntha planet in this world. Only Krishna could come up with a solution to that one. But when Krishna actually appeared to offer him the benediction, he was just so blown away by the beauty of the personal form of Krishna. He said some prayer. It's not in the Bhagavatam, but it's in another scripture that I was desiring broken glass, but I've attained the most valuable gem. Just the transcendental beauty of the Lord's form is so completely satisfying to the vision and to the heart that he said, what was I doing, worshiping the Lord for something? And the Lord is he's the actual object he's the supreme benediction himself, just his darshan. So, and then, of course, one of the 10 offenses in the chanting of the holy name is to maintain material desires, even though understanding so many instructions on this matter. So sometimes people say it's not having the material desires isn't so much the problem, but it's maintaining the material desires. Because by the chanting of Hare Krishna, the material desires should be going. So that as they're going, if you grab onto them as they're leaving, and keep it, out of fear of, because they've been long-time friends of yours, then you're in trouble. But they should actually be going of their own accord by the power of the devotional service. So we have to make sure we don't encourage them to stay longer when they're ready to leave. So, and basically the idea is that the devotional service is satisfying to the self. So as people perform more and more devotional service, they're more and more self-satisfied, and they feel less need for the material things. They don't need to sleep as much, and they don't need to eat as much, and they don't need to. There's so many amazing examples among the Goswamis who actually ate very little and slept very little because they're completely satisfied, whether doing whatever devotional service they're doing, whether it was writing literatures or chanting or worshipping their deities. It was all more exciting than eating and sleeping. It's more satisfying. So they naturally reduced. So therefore we have some kind of sadhana where we perform these devotional duties every day, and then whether we feel like doing them or not, and therefore we transcend the influence of material energy. It's difficult. Performing the devotional service in the Kali Yuga is difficult because the mode of ignorance, which is prominent in Kali Yuga, is diametrically opposite to pure devotional service. It's striving forever in the wrong direction, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So the tendency of the people in general is to do just the opposite of what is good for their spiritual life. So, and because we're living in this society surrounded by people who are fixed in the mode of ignorance, the tendency for us to become contaminated with ignorance and to maintain whatever ignorance we have is strong. So we have to maintain our sadhana despite the influence of ignorance, saying in the form of lethargy and procrastination and various other sleep. And if we maintain our enthusiasm for the devotional service, then just by being fixed in the devotional service, we'll transcend the material energy. Actually, a lot of traditions, they promise some reward after death, which is good. It's always nice to have a reward after death, but if there was a reward we could have before we died, that would be better. So there's a nice verse in chapter 14, text 21, I believe. It goes like, Etan gunan atita trin, dehe dehe samudbhavan, janam ritu jurar dukhair, vimuktamritam ashnite, which says that if one transcends the three modes of material nature, which are influencing the material body, one can become free from birth, death, and their distresses, and enjoy nectar even in this life. And then later in the chapter, it's interesting that Arjuna asked Krishna, he says, what's the symptoms of somebody who's in transcendence? And then how does he attain transcendence? And he lists like 4 verses of symptoms of transcendence. And then in one verse, he says how you can obtain transcendence. Mamchayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan sanmatitaitan brahma bhuya kalpate. By engaging in devotional service, unfailing in all circumstance, one can transcend the 3 modes of material nature and attain Brahman. So, if we can just absorb ourselves only in the devotional service of the Lord, we can actually transcend the influence of the material energy, and we can become free from the miseries of birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and we can enjoy nectar even in this life. And Krishna is very optimistic about transcending the modes of material nature. He starts out mentioning it to Arjuna back in chapter 2. He says, Trigunam Vishya Veda, nice Trigunyam Bhavarjana, Nidvandan is Sattvasto, Yoga Shema Atman. He says, the Vedas deal mostly with the 3 modes of material nature. Just transcend those modes. Become free from all desires for gain and safety, and free from all dualities, and established in the self, basically, those different things. So he thinks it's quite possible, and he just tells Arjuna to do it. Later on he explains how to do it. But the way to do it is to do the devotional service without material desire, basically. Then that's transcendental. Actually, there's a nice little section which I could read because there's a little bit of time in chapter 29 of the 3rd canto of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam. 3:29. It's a nice section, actually. Lord Kapila talks about devotional service in the modes of nature, and devotional service beyond the modes of nature. Text 8. Devotional service executed by a person who's envious, proud, violent, and angry, who's a separatist, and who is a separatist is considered to be a mode of darkness. Ever met people like that in a Hare Krishna temple? You know what mode they're in. The worship of deities in the temple by a separatist with a motive for material enjoyment, fame, and opulence is devotion in the mode of passion. When a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrities of fruitive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. And the manifestation of unadulterated devotional service is exhibited when one's mind is at once attracted to hearing the transcendental name and qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is residing in everyone's heart. Just as the water of the Ganges flows naturally down toward the ocean, such devotional ecstasy, uninterrupted by any material condition, flows toward the Supreme Lord. So that's the best kind of devotional service, in the opinion of Lord Kapila, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So does anybody have any questions, comments, or realizations about any of the topics in the verse or report? Yes?
You were saying more difficult than attaining Krishna consciousness is maintaining it. Am I right?
Oh, I didn't use those words, but let me... just emphasizing that we have to go on with the devotional service despite the material dualities, which is, of course, a common theme in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna's always saying those people who are dear to him are those people who are, don't care for happiness, distress, heat, cold, honor, dishonor, pain, infamy. Those are the people who are dear to him. They don't give a damn about these dualities. They just want to serve Krishna. So that's the platform that we hope to achieve and maintain until the
Whether, the words that I thought you said are the words that you actually said. This is a letter that I saw someone post yesterday from Srila Prabhupada to Damodar. This is dated January 1971. It doesn't say what vigorous work or activity Damodar was engaged in, but this is what Prabhupada's letter to him said. I'm very much anxious that at the same time as you carry out all these outside activities, so it's outside preaching, you are maintaining a strict schedule of temple activities. Such regular activities like attendance of arati, chanting of rounds, study of literature, and class will keep you fit for effective preaching work in the outer field. Our standard of purity must be kept. Another place Prabhupada says, our purity is our unique asset. There could be slick salesmen and people with real sharp, ingenuity and amazing ability of ascertainment and whatever, but because they're not practicing Krishna consciousness as given by Srila Prabhupada, their purity is lacking. Best we can say. Our standard of purity must be kept, otherwise there will be loss of spiritual strength and subsequent fall down. Every one of you should be thoroughly convinced of the power of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra to protect you in all circumstances. And chant accordingly at all times without offense. Then advancement will be swift. So Prabhupada lays the foundation and gives a caution and a warning. And if you do, now he goes to show what wonderful things can happen. Then advancement will be swift, and you will gradually come to see everything clearly, so that you may act for the pleasure of the Lord without uncertainty. When one is spontaneously engaged in this way, always in the service of the Lord and anxious to avoid all mundane activities, is actually experiencing the taste of bliss in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada letter to Damodar, January 10th, 1971. So that made a profound impact on me when I read that yesterday. And I was looking for a way to share that.
Right.
And you opened the door to let steeply sneak.
Yeah, that's definitely relevant. Of course, purity, it said purity is the force, right? Preaching is the essence, purity is the force, utility is the principle, and books are the basis. So Prabhupada is very intent on devotees maintaining purity. And it was striking to me that Kadamba Kanaswami in a class last fall at the 26th Second Avenue, he was quoting the Bhaktivinoda Thakur saying that if we're at Nishta, we can give people Shraddha, and if we're at Bhava, we can give people Ruchi, and if we're at Prema, we can give people everything. So, going along with the idea of purity, the more we advance to the higher stages of devotional service, the more we have to offer the people. It shows how important it is to be very pure, because the more we can actually make an impact on people. If we hopefully I can get to the stage of Nishta so I can give people Shraddha. But I really wonder, because I was in Tallahassee and there was 6 other people there, and I was trying to convince them that Prabhupada wanted people to do at least an hour of Harinam every day, which if you go through the letters you can make a case for that. But I couldn't get, there was no person that I could get consistently to come out on Harinam 1 hour a day. Sometimes they would do 3 hours for a few days and then skip it for a few days, but or they would do half an hour every day. I don't think everybody did every day, but it just seems and nobody was so engaged they couldn't have gone out. So, but the chanting is the main thing, and the more chanting we do, the more we become purified. So many times, if you read, actually in Prabhupada's classes, in particular, he quotes Cheto Darpana Marjana. He talks about the Sankirtan cleanses the mirror of the mind, and that's the main way that we're becoming purified, is by this congregational chanting of the holy name. And the great thing about the Harinam service is that basically it's nurturing our own devotion and everybody else's devotion at the same time. We're hearing and chanting about Krishna, and they're hearing and chanting about Krishna. So it's very very powerful, and it's a way we can get the purity that we need to make an impact, both in impressing Krishna that we're sincere about attaining him, and being so influential that people will, when we speak, they'll actually take it seriously. Because there's just passing out the flyers at the end of the Harinam, you just encounter so much apathy and not uninterest, that it's the reason why I could never become a Sankirtan devotee, because I can only take so much, opposition, lethargy, whatever, before I have to do something else. So, usually, we used to have more people doing the book table, so I didn't notice it before. But basically, I do the book table the whole time. Remember when we had more devotees? There was Kalki and Ananda and stuff, they would do the book table some of the time. So
Krishna arranged
I wasn't just meditating on the lethargy of the conditioned souls going by or their lack of interest. Instead of just chanting and dancing. At any rate, yes.
Krishna remarked how impressed he was with Krishna Kṛpa that he sat at the book table all day and only asked for him to do it when he took lunch.
Well, I'm trying to eliminate lunch, actually. Take lunch before I go out.
First realization and 2 book distribution stories from the 70s.
Okay.
You know, the mind is always like, so, but we know that when we come to the completion of chanting our 16 rounds, for example, the mind is subdued.
Right.
So the same thing with Harinam, that, you know, not just we're trying to subdue our own mind, but we're actually like lifting weights and training so we could actually ultimately serve the holy names, that the holy name can like control everybody's mind. So, you know, it's like a breakthrough when it comes to the point where things become just so super ecstatic that people are just held in like wonder and astonishment. And it's definitely following in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya, reading the chart, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Lord Chaitanya's ecstasy was so great that everybody, the devotees were helpless in regards to Harinam Thakur's passing. And the Kirtan Lord Chaitanya led, and then what to speak of the Rath Yatra. So we should shoot for the rhinoceros in that way. Go for prema, go for full love of God, and that will just. So Hamsadutta was in charge of Germany in the 1970s. The Schloss Radishoff, 1974. So I don't know if it was he or some of the devotees, or combinedly, they decided to hire a sales expert. And how can we distribute more books? And they hired someone who was like highly reputed, maybe the top person at the time there. And he was an honest man. And after observing and watching the devotees for several days, he said, you know, you don't need me. You know, I've been watching you people. You got the main thing that to sell anything. You believe in the product. You know, I can sell you our whole thing and you're going to waste a lot of money, but you don't need what I got, you know.
Wow.
And he just like humbly stepped away. So, and then there was like some sales people watching Pragosh and Company. Maybe it was Guru Maharaj said it too. Their 2 names were like synonymous back in the day, Pragosh and Vaisheshika. And he was wanting them to, you get a lot of offers, you know, like, you know, come work for my company, my stuff, you know. But I think maybe it was a dare. Okay, you know, why don't you try to sell these books? Okay, and the guy was all proud because he was a really good salesman and selling whatever he was selling, and then he just like completely, what's the word? Struck out. Couldn't sell any books, and he realized, whoa, you know, these are not ordinary. This is, it's like Krishna prevented him from, even though he's a great salesman on a material level, because it's Krishna's book. You know, Krishna's not going to let just an ordinary salesman, somebody who's like breaking the regular principles, and just a non-devotee sell my books. So, and Prabhupada would encourage, you're not expert, you're not like a sweet, a slick talker, or you know, this, that, the other thing. Of course, those things are very helpful, you know, but just the purity of purpose is what sells the books.
Thank you. Yes, please.
We have one question online.
Oh, really?
From
From Nada-Bhāgavatam.
We have to speak because the sound disappears.
We have one question online from Nada-Bhāgavatam.
Oh, he's online.
If we are in ignorant devotion or passionate devotional service, how can we raise to the best kind of devotion?
For one thing, we can associate with people who have a higher standard of devotional service than we do, and hope preferably the highest standard, but but anything better than where we are will move in the right direction. And a lot of it had to do with motivations, so we can monitor, look within at our own motivations, and like, for example, like the devotee in the mode of ignorance, let's say, he's envious, proud, violent, and angry. Okay, so we may think of, these feelings may come up in our mind, like we may feel the impetus to act in these ways, but we can control it, you know. I may feel like punching somebody else, punching them out, but I can restrain myself, or I might say something angry to hurt someone, or I can, you know, we have some control over our senses, so we can even if we feel the wrong way, we can avoid acting in the wrong way, because if you act in the wrong way, of course you get the karma for acting in the wrong way, whereas if you feel in the wrong way, there's no karma. But the other thing is that then you become, you strengthen it by acting the wrong way. You strengthen it, whereas if you don't act in that way, you become free from it. I was reading in the Uddhava Gita where Krishna was saying that by not giving in to sinful activities, you become free of their grip, basically. You know, just by refraining, you get strength from that, just by making the endeavor, which was an interesting point. You know, maybe the tendency is there, but if you just don't do it, then you move in the right direction. So I would say those are some things. And then, of course, the loud chanting of the holy name really is very purifying, and it destroys all kinds of ignorance and passion and everything. We have a bunch of people chanting loudly the holy name. And of course, the engaging in deity worship is mentioned to bring people up to the mode of goodness also, because it regulates your life. And it's very pure, you know, because you're always thinking about... The purity of the deity worship is that you have to think about Krishna, you know. Generally, we tend to think about everything in terms of ourselves, but when you're pujari, you have to think about, you know, when Krishna's going to eat, not when you're going to eat, you know. You know, and when Krishna's going to sleep, and everything's... So, even if you just do it out of duty, you have to think about Krishna, because it's your duty to think about Krishna. So you become very pure from thinking about Krishna all the time instead of thinking about yourself. So those are some ideas. Anything else? Yes?
I wanted to actually ask about, it says in this verse that, you know, we can perform devotional service. We should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead if we don't want anything, right? So we don't have any material desires. But I see that we can really have some kind of desires, and they can be supposedly material, but if we want them to use in Krishna's service, like how can we, where is this line? Whether it's mind tricks you that, oh yes, you want to use it in devotional service, but actually it's material desire, or it's real spiritual desire, even though it looks like material. How can I understand that?
Well, for you it's easy. You just write by Sheshika Prabhu. You just write by Sheshika Prabhu and ask him. For the people whose guru has left the planet, then it's more difficult. You can ask senior devotees, you know, or people who you trust for being very pure, and, you know, and giving good guidance. And you can tell by the result too sometimes. Yeah. Yes?
Kṛṣṇa Muni, Prabhupada writes, he had a slight desire for marriage, but it's indicated in the purports that he left everything to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if we depend on the choice of Krishna, then we'll get beyond our expectation. In the case of Kṛṣṇa Muni, got the princess, Devotees' daughters.
Mm.
person. So that I remember that we depend on the selection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if a material desire is something that can be regulated or ultimately used in the Lord's service, like in the case of marriage, what is the most tangible result is that children are born, and in that case it was a ray of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It was the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, Lord Devotees. The human form of life, everything, Paul said, nothing is to be given up, but it's meant to be regulated. So if it's used in the Lord's service, ultimately everything can increase devotional service, both for ourselves and those associated with us. But your question and the verse here, it's like depending on the Supreme Personality.
Right.
And in the case of true homage, I completely, you wanted the topmost material thing that you could possibly desire, but at the end, you compared it to wanting a piece of broken glass, compared to having you, a valuable diamond. Krishna will handle it in such a way that you will not desire it anymore. And in terms of the example of marriage, then there's the varnashram, and then we have the progress to vanapras, retired life, and then fully renounced, that all your material desires are gone, and Prabhupada says you're free to move anywhere safely in any direction.
Wow. Nice.
Our whole life, especially when initiated, is under the canopy and umbrella of Krishna and spiritual master, and the salutary Vedic instruction. So everything that we could possibly have to deal with can be handled in such a way that it will become purified and elevated. Perfection of all. Ye prashade pure sarva asha. Following the instruction and surrendering to the spiritual master leads one to the perfection of all desires.
It's a good point. It's a good place to end, don't you think? Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki.